considered that you have the power to transform your experience with men in dating, love, and relationships simply through the words that you speak and the thoughts that you think? I'm going to take some thoughts today based upon the wonderful book by Don Miguel Ruiz called The Four Agreements. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about the first agreement. My name is Michelle Marchant Johnson with Love Life Coaching, and I'm here to help you be that woman of high value who attracts your high quality man. Now, this wonderful book by Don Miguel Ruiz, The Four Agreements, is a very well-known book. If you live your life in harmony with these four agreements, it literally has the ability to transform your experience in life in a very positive and powerful way. Today, I'm going to give you a little bit of my interpretation on the four agreements, specifically as it pertains to your love life. The first agreement is called Be Impeccable with Your Word. And he defines that as speak with integrity, say only what you mean, avoid using the word to speak against yourself or to gossip about others, use the power of your word in the direction of truth and love. So oftentimes when we think about being impeccable with our word, we think about being honest, we think about being in integrity with how we show up in life, that we honor our commitments, that we honor what people are relying on us to do, what we've said we will do. And that is certainly a part of it. We're honest in our communications, we're truthful. But I think it goes even beyond that. Now, the book defines being impeccable as being without sin. When we speak words in a direction, in a negative direction or in a negative way, we're actually creating something, and we're creating sin against ourselves and others. He said that when we speak our words, we're actually creating. It's a creative process. We're putting something out there in the world that creates something very real. And I believe this, and this is why with my private clients in my Meet Him and Keep Him private coaching program and in my group membership program, Mr. Right Academy, I always encourage the women there to speak in the direction of what they want, to focus on saying the things that they want and speaking in positive terms about themselves, about what they want, about the kind of man that they want to be with, because I actually do believe that there's a lot of power in our words. And I actually think it's really important to be able to speak into what you truly desire in terms of your love life and your relationship. And I've shared that for me when I was single, if I had a whole vision statement of what I wanted, but in one sentence it was, I will meet and marry the man of my dreams. That was the simple creative process that I made with my words. And that became not only a statement for me, but it became something that felt not only possible, but even inevitable as I created that in my words. And he also says that in the book that when we speak words, we basically can cast a spell. He calls it a spell on ourselves, or we can cast a spell upon others. He even refers to the negative words that we speak, or the gossip that we speak, or the talking about people in a negative way that we speak as black magic. And we can perform this black magic on ourselves or on others based on the words that we speak. So for an example of this for ourselves might be if we allow ourselves to speak words, even in our mind, with our thoughts, that are negative about ourselves, like I'm too old, I'm too fat, I'm not enough this, I'm too much that, I've missed my chance, the kind of man that I want is not going to want me, whatever those thoughts are that are negative, that take you into a negative spell. Because when we are speaking those words, our mind often can begin to believe them to the point that it creates that reality for us. We start to develop a confirmation bias, and our belief becomes stronger and stronger until that's what we see. An example of this with men might be, let's just say you're with a group of women, and maybe one or two of the women have had recent dating experiences or a breakup or a heartache or some kind of betrayal or disappointment from a man, and the conversation begins with a group of women, which can be a bonding experience, and other women can feel like they're being supportive, but it can turn into a man-bashing experience where women together are talking about the negative qualities of men, and then we start to see men as a whole in a negative way rather than as individuals. We start to see them as guilty rather than innocent. And we start to experience men that way. This perception starts to feel like the reality. I believe that in our love lives, and if we want to experience more powerful and effective relationships, this be impeccable with our word can be really, really key in the overall experience that you have. Saying only what you mean in terms of like what you lead someone to believe in a relationship. So in other words, you don't allow someone to believe something that is not really backed up by your feelings. So if you sense that, for example, that a man has a lot deeper feelings for you than you have for him, and that's something that you're not sure is going to move in that direction, at a certain point it becomes an obligation to speak in terms of truth about that so that he's not under a spell of believing something that's not true. So there's a lot of different directions to go with this, and it could be potentially a long conversation, but I just wanted to bring this to your attention because I believe this principle is really, really powerful in our dating lives, in our romantic lives, in all of our relationships, in all of life. Don't take anything personally. So the way the book describes this is nothing others do is because of you. Now just sit with that for a minute. Does that ring true to you? Sometimes that's kind of hard to believe. We'll talk about it more. He goes on to say, what others say and do is a projection of their own reality, their own dream. When you are immune to the opinions and actions of others, you won't be the victim of needless suffering. So let's think about this in the context of dating, because in the context of dating, oftentimes we get hurt or disappointed, and it can be very hard not to take things personally, starting with when we don't get a response online, or a conversation drops off online, or a man doesn't ask us out or doesn't call us back or says he's going to call and doesn't call. That goes back to the first agreement, which is to be impeccable with your word. And then once we're in a relationship, someone might just disappear. We might have a relationship that ends without any closure, which can be really painful. We can have a betrayal, or we can have infidelity, or we can have someone ghost or disappear. And it can be really difficult not to take that personally. And I think this is a really interesting concept to consider. So he says, for example, nothing other people do is because of you. It is because of themselves. All people live in their own mind, in their own dream, in their own mind. And it's a completely different world than the one we live in. Now, I think that's true because I think we all see the world not as it is. We see other people not necessarily as they are, but through the lens of who we are. And so if that's true, then they are living in a different world, in a different reality than what we're experiencing. When we take something personally, we make the assumption that they know what is in our world, and we try to impose our world on their world. And then he goes on to say that even if someone directly insults you or says something that seems really mean or really hateful, it has nothing to do with you. He says what they say, what they do, and the opinions they give are according to the agreements they have in their own minds. The point of view comes from all the programming they have received in their lives. So I do think that there's a lot of truth to this, and I think this is really kind of a deep concept to explore and see how it might apply in dating. So, for example, I do think that it's often when someone seemingly rejects you in your love life in one way or another, I do think that more often than not, it has to do with what's going on with them, in their minds, in their lives, in their reality, in what they think they can offer, or the place that they think they're in their lives in terms of how they might be able to show up in a relationship. And so I do believe that more often than not, when people exhibit these behaviors, and I'm not justifying them, but when they exhibit these behaviors, which can feel like their personal rejection, it really does have a lot more to do with them than it does to do with us. And I have to be honest with you, this is kind of a difficult concept for me in some respects, because it is hard not to take anything personally and to believe that everything that other people do or say is because of them and their reality and their perception and their world and their programming, so to speak. But I do think that he's on to something here. And I think it could be really powerful if we could rise above this in our dating and recognize that our value as individuals, your value as a woman, my value as a woman, is not changed by someone else's actions, by someone else's words, by someone else's opinion of us. And if we absorb that, if we take that in, then he says we are easy prey for the black magicians. He says they can hook you easily with one little opinion and feed you whatever poison they want. And because you take it personally, you eat it up. He says when you take things personally, then you feel offended, and your reaction is to defend your beliefs and create conflicts. So he also talks about another interesting aspect of this is that even when someone says something really, really flattering or really, really like complimentary, yes, it's okay to receive a compliment, but our worth or our beliefs about ourselves should not be based upon the negative or the positive words of others. That has to come intrinsically from us. Yes, it feels good when other people pay us a compliment, and we can receive that as a compliment, but not to the level that our self-worth or our beliefs or our value of ourself is based upon what could be the changing opinion of another person. So that means that if this person happens to change their mind, or they happen to walk out of our lives, or they happen to disappear, that our value and who we are does not go with them. And our confidence and our beliefs about our worth and our value does not disappear or is not destroyed when that happens. So I think this is a really interesting concept to explore. And I think it's a really powerful principle if we can remember this and apply this wherever possible in our dating lives. So this is agreement number 3. And I think this is an incredibly powerful concept. And I think it's also so interesting to pay attention to how often we make assumptions in our relationships. And I think that's because in our minds, we have a need to know or understand or make sense of the world. And part of that is making sense of the things that other people do, or their motives or their reasons. And so we create all kinds of ideas in our minds, and many times those show up in the form of assumptions. One of the things that I've definitely learned in doing all of my interviews with men over the last few years in my man panel events and other speaker series, and in talking with many, many men, well over 100 men over the last few years, is how men often say some version of, please don't make us guess, please tell us what you want, please be willing to ask for and be clear about what you're wanting, needing, what your preferences are, what would please you, what would make you happy, so that we have a chance of stepping up or fulfilling those requests or showing up for you in the way that you want us to. However, oftentimes as people, as women, men do this too, we believe that if someone knows us, cares about us, loves us, they will automatically know or understand what we want or what we need without us specifically asking, requesting, or telling them what would please us, what we would like, what would make us happy, what we would prefer. And I know this is a cause of disappointment and heartache and conflict. And one of the agreements that my husband and I made when we first got married was that we would never be one of those couples who waited and wondered whether or not the other spouse would remember our birthday or get us what we want for a birthday or for Christmas. Or we would never be one of those couples who wondered whether or not the other spouse would remember the anniversary of our wedding and be upset or angry or disappointed if the other one didn't remember or didn't get us the right thing. We agreed that we would talk about those things, that we would plan them, that we would communicate, that we would share, so that we could create a win-win scenario where both of us could get what we wanted, what we hoped for, what would please us, and we could share these occasions and be happy together rather than be disappointed. So that's a positive example here. However, if we had been of the mind that each other should automatically know these things, or they should be good guessers about what we wanted or needed from the other, then we might have set ourselves up for an assumption or a disappointment. We have a tendency to make assumptions about everything, and the problem about making assumptions is that we believe they are the truth. We make assumptions about what others are doing or thinking, we take it personally, and then we blame them and react by sending them emotional poison. I think that's an interesting way to put it. He says sometimes we're afraid to ask for clarification, and so we make assumptions or we make up things in our mind. So, for example, if the guy doesn't ask you out, you say, well, I guess he just didn't like me. That's an assumption. It might be that this guy has some other thing going on in his life, or he has his own fears or doubts or insecurities that are impacting him, and that it has nothing to do with you. But because we have a need to try to make sense of things in our mind, we oftentimes can make assumptions. It's always better to ask questions than to make an assumption, because assumptions set us up for suffering. And he says when we have the power to ask and get clarification, he says, even if we hear something we don't understand or we don't like, at least we have the truth and we're not just basing it on some false belief. And he also brings up a really interesting concept here that I think is really common. And I just want to read a little bit of this and then I'll make a little commentary. He says, often when you go into a relationship with someone you like, you have to justify why you like that person, at least justify it in your mind. Sometimes you justify it to other people. And he says, oftentimes we see only what we want to see, and we deny that there are things that we don't like about that person. So this might be, an example of this might be, you can see some red flags, or you can see some warning signs, or you can see some qualities that potentially could be very problematic in the future, but because there's attraction or because there's chemistry, because you would like it to work out, or because you've invested a lot of time into this person, you choose to kind of put the blinders on about those things. And we start lying to ourselves, and we make an assumption, and one of those assumptions is, my love will change this person. And he talks about how this is a very dangerous assumption because he says your love will not change anybody. I totally agree with this. Do not go in for changing a man. What you see is what you get with a man. He will resent it. He will not change if you try to change him. People can only choose to change themselves, not because you want them to or you believe that your love will transform them. And sometimes as women, we also have this savior complex where we believe that we can save someone from themselves, or we can heal them from past wounds. And this is work that they have to do on their own. And then he says, then something happens between the two of you and you get hurt. Suddenly you see what you didn't want to see before. And he says, now you have to justify your emotional pain and blame them for your choices. And then he talks about how it's so important to find someone that you don't have to change at all. He says it is much easier to find someone who's already the way you want him or her to be instead of trying to change that person. And it's also important for you to find someone who can love and accept you for the way you are, and not someone that's going to want to change you. I think this is really, really powerful to keep in mind. The way to keep yourself from making assumptions is to ask questions. And sometimes this takes courage and confidence to ask questions, to seek for a deeper understanding, to seek to understand where someone else is coming from or what's really going on with them without making up the stories or coming to conclusions or judging or making assumptions that we know about what's going on. And he says, once you hear the answer, you will not have to make assumptions because you know the truth. And he says, this is really, really important too. And I think this is something that we as women sometimes are not good at doing because we're afraid that if we ask for something or if we need something or we're making requests, that it might be too much or someone might not be able to fulfill that request, or they might choose not to, or we might fear rejection. But he says, always find your voice to ask for what you want. Everyone has the right to tell you no or yes, but you always have the right to ask. And this can be done in a nice way. You can say something like, you know what I'd really enjoy, or you know what I'd really prefer, or you know what would work better for me, or I have a request, or I'd like to ask if this is something you can do for me or help me with. Likewise, everybody has the right to ask you, and you have the right to say yes or no. He says, if you don't understand something, it's better for you to ask and be clear instead of making an assumption. The day you stop making assumptions, you will communicate cleanly and clearly, free of emotional poison, without making assumptions. Your word becomes impeccable. And remember, the first agreement is be impeccable with your word. And he says, when you are clear with your communications, part of that is not making assumptions, all of your relationships will change, not just with your partner, but with everyone else. And I also think that a part of this is kind of my interpretation, part of this is assuming the best, assuming innocence in other people until we know otherwise. So in other words, don't assume that others have the worst motives or the lowest motives. I believe that most people are doing the best that they can with the knowledge, background, experience, and understanding that they have in the moment. And so I think if we can see each other through those eyes of innocence and not make assumptions in our relationships, particularly in our dating relationships and our more intimate relationships, and give each other the benefit of the doubt and seek for deeper understanding, I think this is really powerful. I know Stephen R. Covey, one of his principles that he teaches in his famous book is to seek first for understanding and then seek to be understood. So that's agreement number 3, which is don't make assumptions. And I think it's really, really powerful, especially as we layer these 4 agreements. One quick thing that I'd like to remind you of right now is that you don't have to be perfect to be lovable. Isn't that great news? Because if you had to be perfect to be lovable, none of us would ever find love. And in fact, it's even in those imperfections and what we might consider to be weaknesses or flaws or those sides of ourselves that we don't consider to be as polished or as perfect as we might want them to be, that actually makes us relatable and in some ways safe for other people to show their real selves and even lovable. And so that has to do with agreement number 4, as we've been going through the 4 agreements, and that is always do your best. But your best does not mean perfection. So I really love this concept of always doing your best and keeping in mind that your best does not have to be perfection. Doing your best and putting the first 3 agreements into action and doing the best that you can is a key to happiness in your life, satisfaction in your life, but that they don't have to be practiced perfectly. In fact, he says, the first 3 agreements will only work if you do your best. Don't expect that you will always be able to be impeccable with your word. We try, but we're not going to be perfect. Your routine habits are too strong and firmly rooted in your mind, but you can do your best. Don't expect that you will never take anything personally. Just do your best. Don't expect that you will never make another assumption, but you certainly can do your best. He says, by doing your best, the habits of misusing your word, taking things personally, and making assumptions will become weaker and less frequent with time. You don't need to judge yourself, feel guilty, or punish yourself if you cannot keep these agreements. If you're doing your best, you will feel good about yourself, even if you still make assumptions, take things personally, and still are not impeccable with your word. He says you have to honor the man or woman that you are, and part of that is accepting yourself and your own humanity and taking care of yourself and doing the best that you can at all times, recognizing that your best is going to be different from moment to moment and from day to day. Now, this is not about letting yourself off the hook, and this is not about saying, well, I'm just going to be who I am. There is this intention with this book that you are going to seek to be more impeccable with your word. You are going to seek to not take things personally. You are going to continue to seek to not make assumptions. You're going to continue through awareness and through developing your skills and your strength in these areas to make progress. But you're going to not judge yourself or criticize yourself or not be willing to forgive yourself if you fall short. And I think this is really important to recognize in a relationship that we first start with being accepting of ourselves, and that's part of what allows us to love and accept other people. He also says, when you do your best, you're going to live your life intensely. I think that's interesting. He says you're going to be productive, you're going to be good to yourself. And I believe being good to yourself actually models for other people how you want to be treated. And it also sends a message to the universe that you're worthy of being treated well. So you're going to be good to yourself. You will be giving to yourself. You'll be giving yourself to your family, to your community, to everything. And the action itself of doing your best will make you intensely happy. He says, when you do your best, you take action. So like I said, this is not about letting yourself off the hook. Doing your best is taking the action because you love it, not because you're expecting a reward. It's in the action itself. And he's also saying when you're doing your best, you honor what is right for you. When you feel like it's a no, it's a no. When you feel like it's a yes, it's a yes. So in other words, when you're doing your best, you're in tune with what is right for you, and you're able to say yes to what feels yes to you, and you're able to say no to what doesn't. He also talks about taking care of your physical body, taking care of your soul, taking care of yourself in a way that allows you to not only do your best, but to be your best, because as you do this, then you're going to be able to invite in and attract the kind of person that is going to be able to see the real you and who's going to be attracted to who you really are without any false pretense or without pretending to be someone else. So I love this concept of doing your best, and I do believe that most people out there, with the exception perhaps of really narcissistic kind of people or people with, disorders, sociopaths, that kind of thing, most people are doing their best with the knowledge and understanding that they know. But as we grow and as we develop as human beings, as we are committed to our own self-growth and understanding and awareness about what it takes to be successful in communicating and in relationships, and as we put into place these 4 agreements that we've been discussing, I believe that can be a part of it. That allows us to transform what is possible in terms of our experiences in relationships and to have better, healthier, stronger, more satisfying relationships. And that's the whole point of exploring the 4 agreements through the lens of dating, love, and relationships. I really do like this book. And like I said, I have no affiliate association with this book or anything like that. But I've read it several times, and like I said, when I read it most recently, I just thought that it really has some principles and ideas that I think are very powerful to apply in our lives, and particularly in our relationships. And I hope that this has been helpful to you. I hope if you've missed video 3, 2, or 1, that you'll go back and review them. Good to start with 1 and go from there, because they kind of build upon each other and they're all kind of intertwined and related. But I think that if you can seek to do these things and always do your best, I think it really does have the power to transform your experience in your dating life and can help you to have the kind of relationship that you dream of. So I'm sending you love, blessings, and holding that vision for you to have exactly what you want in terms of your love life, and I'm looking forward to connecting with you soon. I'd love to hear your thoughts or any questions. Please feel free to leave a comment. If you've liked this video, click the like button, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel as well, because I'd love to stay connected with you in this way as well. Thank you so much for watching. Sending you love and blessings. Bye for now.